But I would like to introduce our esteemed speakers today on this panel. It's about this stretch of the river, which is available for purchase out here at the Oak Lake Writers Society table and booth. This is a reprint, or a republication, I should say, of the original. And I was looking at my office for the original version, which is it's a very interesting color of orange. It's a very nice picture of a sunset of the river. But I wanted to talk a little bit about this book and how it was influential in my own work. I was working at Pizza Hut at the time of the Lewis and Clark reenactment when they rebuilt a keelboat and sailed or navigated upriver. And I didn't know actually what was going on at the time. It was like buffet time. We were serving pizza, and these men walked in with buckskin and fringe, and little like raccoon hats. And I didn't know what was going on until I read this book. And it was actually my mom who had a copy of this book, Angela Estes, and she had attended a workshop that Craig had put on, Craig Howe, and that's actually one of the first books I was actually introduced to Dakota and Lakota writing, was this book. And it was written in response to that bicentennial celebration on the river. It served as the basis of my own interest in Minnesota or the Missouri River and our relationship as Dakota and Lakota people to that specific landscape. And it's the first kind of book from the Ocheti Shakoi, or not the first book, but it's the first book from the Oak Lake Writers Society that dealt with a specific sacred landscape. The second one is Heisapa Oikamble, which is Black Hills Dreams, which is also an edited volume. It's available out there. It's published through Living Justice Press. This republication is from Craig's organization, CAIRNS, the Center for American Indian Research and Native Studies, which is based out of Wingsprings, South Dakota. There's literature out there. The reason why I'm bringing all this up is because oftentimes people ask for recommendations for books or for further study, and it's all right there in one place. There's a lot of amazing work that's being done, especially in terms of curriculum and teaching in the classroom. So I have one little note here that says, please help me thank the Oscar Larson Performing Arts Center for hosting this event, and as well as the dozen other volunteers who plan, promote, and staff festival events. You too can help the festival. First, you can provide us with feedback about this year's event. The link for our online survey is available at sdbookfestival.com. Second, you can help keep the festival free by making a tax-deductible donation to South Dakota Humanities Council. Please use the QR code found at our donation stations and info tables. Or go to South Dakota or sdhumanities.org. Remember, we'd love a $50 for 50 years donation, which enters you into the drawing for the festival guide cover painting by Jennifer White, which is available for doing at the front. The festival would not be possible without generous support of numerous organizations and individuals who have already donated and are acknowledged in the back cover of the festival guide. So please take a look. So today, again, the title of this program is the republication of the stretches of the river. I'll let each of our authors introduce themselves. I'll just do a brief introduction. The first on your right is Dr. Craig Howe. He's the founder and one of the main people at the CAIRNS organization that I previously mentioned. My friend Joel Waters, who's a poet, well-known poet, Laniko Lee, who's been a long time member of the Oak Lake Writers Society, actually a co-founding member of the society and a mentor to me as well. And we also have Lydia Whirlwind Soldier, whose book, is it Memory Song? No, it's Survival Songs. Survival Songs, his new book of poetry, Survival Songs. It just came out, it's on sale. She is a renowned educator for the Ocheti Shakoi. We also have Gabby, who's sure Dr. Lydia Whirlwind Soldier. So she, I believe, is in this book as well. So if you want to join us on stage, Gabby, that'd be great.
Oh, okay.
But without further ado, I'll just turn it over. We can go down the line if you want to introduce yourself. Start with Lydia asked not to go first, so we'll start on this side. We'll start with Craig, and then we'll go with Joel, Gabby, Laniko, and Lydia. So.
I'm Craig Howe. I'm a citizen of the Oglala Sioux Tribe and a co-editor of this stretch of the river with Kim Tallbear. And also Chuck Woodard is sitting right over here. Chuck, would you raise your hand in case anyone doesn't know you? But I think everyone does. But anyway, Chuck and Kim and I edited the book. Chuck's name is not on the cover. It is inside. We couldn't have done it without him. And then on this reprint, then, that's mine.
Mine is Joel Waters from Dakota, and I have a piece of music I contributed. I first joined Brooklyn Writer Society in 2002, and that was when they asked me to contribute on some of this work.
I'm Gabrielle Patinish-Kamska. I live in the community of Enemy Swim in northeastern South Dakota, and I've been a long time member of the Oak Lake Riders, and I'm currently on the board. And, I have a piece that I contribute to this work.
I'm Laniko Lee, and I'm definitely a river person. My father is from Pine Ridge Reservation. My mother was Standing Rock. My grandparents from Fort Berthold, so we're definitely river people. I've been with Oak Lake Riders from its inception in 1993, which is next year it'll be 30 years that we have been working together as a group and helping one another to preserve what is our literature, our own literary history, and using it as a vehicle for our communities.
Okay, I'm Lydia Whirlwind Soldier. I hope you can hear me. I'm really grateful to be part of this group. Native American writers are very talented, and in my portion of the stretch of the river, I basically repeat a lot of the history, but I add my own poetry to it and quotes from chiefs, and basically I try to relate what it means to us today, and that probably the native tribes didn't really know what was going on, but it's an interesting history. And in the end, I write a poem, and I'd like to read it to you. In those buffalo days, they saw something new in the Emerald Green Valley in Tawny Hills. All there for the use of the destruction of a new nation. Just think it took, this nation's been what, 200 years, a little over 200 years? And look at the destruction already. The animal nations, species that the people never saw, coyotes, prairie wolves, antelopes, all the different types of animals that were new to the people that were traveling through Lewis and Clark. In the sky of clear blue and cotton-fluffed clouds, the winged nation flourished. Flocks of geese filled the skies. Pelicans, lupin cranes fished along the Mini-Shoshe, and we call it Mini-Shoshe. I don't know how that word Missouri came out of Mini-Shoshe, but I guess it did. Anyway, I'll just read you the last portion of my poem. Grapes, plums, cherries, and currants in every ravine, vegetables and medicines of the plant nations many spirit species, now only spirit memories. A lot of those have, you know, they don't exist anymore, they're extinct. As the face of death stepped onto the shores of the Minnesota in those buffalo days.
Thank you so much for those introductions. And I want to turn to a question for Craig, and I'll ask each of the contributors to chime in as well, because in this book, like the Chisapa Oihamble book, there's a discussion at the end. And this really captures kind of the spirit of Oak Lake Writer Society. I believe it's a transcribed discussion, roundtable discussion with the contributors at an Oak Lake event. And I always found these useful because it gives the reader an idea of what was being talked about and how the book itself was conceptualized. But also it captures something that isn't really readily accessible to those outside of Oak Lake. And that's the kind of intellectual work that we do as writers and thinking through these things and the kind of mentorship and perspectives that we all bring. Sometimes it gets heated, sometimes it's really funny. There's a lot that's learned, and I really appreciated this. But Kim Tallbear, who's not with us right now, she begins this discussion about describing this book as looking at the river as an actor. And I wanted to just turn it over to Craig with that kind of thought, you know, and to sort of meditate on that and how this book was conceived and also why it was republished.
Okay, so thanks. And so the idea of the book came about with, so this Bicentennial was coming up in 2004. Lewis and Clark went up the river in 1804 and then down the river in 1806 on their way back to St. Louis. And so in 2004 was the 200th anniversary. And people were writing about that, but from the perspectives of of Lewis and Clark, of those expedition men, or even modern days, but looking as though you're on the shore out at you're on the river looking towards the shore, right? That's the viewpoint. And what we wanted to do was be on the shore looking at the river initially. Then we like this idea of, in Lakota philosophy, of course, all the plant nations. We've heard Lydia talk about that already. These plant nations, the bird nations, the elk nations, the water nations, these are seen as living entities. And so for the discussion, this dialogue that happened at a Laniko's Birdsong Inn up in Java, South Dakota, in Sinte, like at the fall time, or it's cold. Chuck and I stayed in Globe, I think, at a friend's bed and breakfast. But anyway, this idea was this dialogue amongst us talking about the experiences of river as living beings. It didn't have to be the Missouri River, but it could be an analog, so any other river. So Gabrielle and Laniko both spoke about other rivers in our discussion and about history. I think about Gladys Hawk's piece that was so nice in the book as well. So we wanted to foreground the river as trying our best to think of it as a living entity rather than just things that events happened on.
Joel Lars again. I wasn't there for when you guys had the discussion there,
Right.
but I do remember from the previous retreat, it was like summer or whatever it was, I kind of wanted to just kind of bring some little brevity to the situation of how ridiculous the Bicentennial was, how much of a big deal that they made. And I wanted to bring that back to one of my friends from Vermilion who was working with some guy who lived in Yankton. So he lived like along the river, and he wanted to start up his own business of selling Bicentennial sand off of the Missouri River. So he bought him like these little glasses that he would sell. So like Lewis and Clark run a Bicentennial sand. It was just so ridiculous. And my friend actually had a little glass of sand. And I was like, they could go that far to do that, and then they were thinking about some sort of theme park situation. So that's what I decided to write about. But I wish I would have incorporated in there that little block of sand for sale.
I think one of the really important parts of Lakota culture, and it gets overlooked in the short time span that Europeans have been on this continent, that they forget that our literature and oral tradition comes from time immemorial. That's how long Dakota people have, been on this earth, and the sacred places are marked all over the prairie, and it's a vast territory. It's goes into Canada, Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota, Nebraska, Iowa, the western part of Wisconsin, and it was a shared territory, and that's where that concept, all my relatives, that even though in this society, American society, they look at the river as, being geographical features, there's a different perspective for Dakota people that it's personified in the earth itself, and the river, and the animals and plants, and all the beings, the living entities that exist there are seen as nations, and as nations they have rights in terms of the Dakota culture. And that's not how America views the world. It's a different perspective. And because of that, the resources were, you can see what's happened to our resources, the air, the earth, the pollution of things. If you see yourself related to something, you're less likely to ruin it. You're going to take care of it. And because it's not, these are seen as geographical features and animals and separate from human beings, the rights of those things to exist aren't acknowledged in this society. There's no rights for Mother Earth. There's no rights for, the Missouri River or any other river. I think the Minnesota River was one of the most polluted rivers in the country at one time, like 10 years ago. And these are all areas in Dakota territory. And from our literatures that talk about how these things came into physical existence on the earth, it was always taught by the grandmothers and grandfathers who were first teachers that these elements have to be treated as they're sacred because we need them to live. And there's not that shared feeling in America that we should protect all of these things. We should protect each other. We should protect, the living beings. We should protect the waters as entities. And I think that goes back to what happened at Standing Rock. That was the basis for those grandmothers and grandfathers that wanted to protest the oil, because they wanted to ensure that that river remained sacred. And it's in, in northeastern South Dakota, where I'm from, and it's the Lake Travis Reservation, where two bands, the CC-Tuan, Wakbet-Tuan, live. The word Sistan means people who live in fishing villages. We can no longer eat the fish that are our namesake because those lakes up there are polluted. They'll tell pregnant women and children shouldn't even eat the fish. And so that's how far the damage to our culture and harms have happened, that they're serious. Because it's not just Dakota people who eat fish. There's sportsmen in South Dakota who like fish. So we're not protecting the things in the environment. And we're not protecting that long history of, these things were here for thousands of years, and in a short time span, American society has devastated and ruined them. The beauty of them, the purpose of them for existing, it's all been ruined. And why would a society that cherishes, freedoms and liberties, why would they do that to things? Why would you do that to living entities and not respect their lives and the right for them to exist? And so I think this book, I hope, brings up those questions for people to think about, because we can all have action items in our lives. We can all do things to support changing those ways of living and the things that we're doing. And I think all these writers give all these various perspectives, from our cultural perspective to living in an American society and to what's happened to this country. You know, it gives that background about why we think the way we do as tribal people about our homeland.
Well, I grew up on the river, and it seems to be where my mind is all the time. The older I get, the more I want to reflect about and everything that has to do with my childhood on that river, because there were so many adventures. But I also, I come from a family of storytellers, and most of you probably, if you've been on the internet, have Googled my aunt, Mary Louise Defender Wilson, and she has many of the stories that are of our part of the world, and how we have become intimately relatives to everything living. On my father's reservation is our pipekeeper, an Arvo-looking horse, tells us all about how the earth is like human. It's like, it has all the parts that make us realize that we have, if we want to live, we have to let the earth live as well. We went to a dedication, and I can't remember the name of the place, but it's between here and Sioux Falls, when they were doing the aerial maps where, I don't know what it's called anymore. It's been so long. But Arvo pointed out that something I heard as a child, and that's the fact that the Black Hills is shaped like the heart. And all of the things that have to do with our being able to sustain ourselves as Indian people come from that sense of knowing that the heart is life, and that the earth has that same kind of experience. Turtle Island, what we call the United States and this continent, has all those parts. And all of the tribes that live here in this area that we call our home, our tribal homelands, they've shrunk over the years, but we know these places to have those elements and those parts that make up life. So water as a source of life is in everything. I once made a comment to a mixed group in a group, let's put it that way. And I indicated that the source of knowing we have longevity with water comes from the name we have for mother, Ina. And it's very close to Ina, the rock. So water comes from the rock. We know that when you go anywhere where there's a falls, like Sioux Falls, we're reminded of the fact that without water, there is no life. That's what scientists are doing now, is trying to find where the people can gather themselves up and escape from a place that they have no longer an interest in because they're depleting the resources, one of the most important being water. So we're paying attention to Elon Musk and what he's all about in terms of setting the benchmark for reaching out beyond our Earth. In the meantime, the indigenous people are awakening our fever, our understanding, our intimacy for what is home. It's falling back on us again to remind people how we are related to our home.
It doesn't take very many gardeners long to realize that the dirt they're pushing about, making room for seeds, is that they are actually moving about everything that lived before, because it is now returned to earth. So when we pay attention to these things, we begin to have an awakening of a spirit of understanding that is one. Over the course of humanity, there has been the creation of many different ways to interpret spirit. But one only needs to breathe or hold your breath to know that it's in everything that is breathing. And the earth needs that same kind of breath, the cleansing of itself in a way that sustains everything that comes from it. So when we are gardening, if we keep that in mind, we also are paying attention to our own longevity and our legacy. What have we done to keep our home clean and healthy? My family is scattered all over this continent. Some live in Canada, some live on the West Coast, and some on the East Coast, but that came about as a result of the river being dammed. My family was one of those that were displaced, and so we're not as close anymore. We don't do the same kinds of things we used to do when I was a child. But at the same time, we are reminding one another when we do visit of some of the things that they're exploring a new place where they live, and some of us who stayed in our area growing up, we are, again, writing and sharing some of the things that they remember as children. My own family lived off the river in such a profound way that when I was, I think I was 8 years old when the REA, the Rural Electric Association, or I guess it's affiliation, or whatever the A stands for, came into our part of the country. And at the time, there was no real word for what was going to be happening when we can have electricity, turn the light on, and then turn a switch and the light will come on. And so that's how old I am. I'm sorry to tell you that. I'm about getting to be like Methuselah. But, but thinking about that, my discussions around the table as a child were all about why did we leave our homes? Why were we pushed off our home? And the concept of the electricity and how that was going to make our lives better was what some of the progressives in our family were promoting. And it was not well understood by the elders of our family. And so in talking about that, there were lots of metaphors that the electricity was wakiaka, the thunder and the lightning that was going to be captured. When they took the river away, they were capturing, they being the ones who were making all these changes, and that was the federal government. But putting the lightning into a wire began to change our language, and so we had to talk about ways in which we were going to be able to, quote unquote, live a better life without the river. We had seasons. We lived by seasons when I was younger, and those seasons had an awful lot to do with the relationships we had with the animals around us, the way we even handled our own livestock and how we took care of the land that we were on. Where I grew up is Chief Nohart's land, and we called it Chief Nohart. All along the river, some of these places are named after the chiefs that were the bands that they were head of. So there's Swiftbird, there's Nohart. Further up, there's On the Tree, and there's Blackfoot. All these places on the Cheyenne River where I grew up have these names of places that people gathered in the fall in late summer, and walk the river with bags, with burden bags, baskets and all, harvesting everything that we could have. Now the only place we can do that, and thank goodness, is our creator, Dakushkashka, has ways of taking care of those who remember. And so the Morrow now has the Morrow River, which is, by the way, Lydia points out wherever that name came from. But Little Owl, that river is abundant again with all the berries that we remember from the river. But some things that didn't come back, I got involved with at Nebraska City with the Arbor Day Foundation. I would like to see us revive the old hazelnuts. We used to have big buckets of hazelnuts, 5-gallon buckets that we would gather those up and all. And then we would share those we would make little bags and share those. People would come to visit, and then they would bring things, and we would always have those because people who lived off the river and farther up on the ridge, they would have things that we didn't have. So we were always sharing what we had as bounty that was really a gift to us. So when we got together to write about this response, and this is, I don't have, my sister lives out on the West Coast, but I thought, well, how can we make this so special? So I prepared a salmon. And because I didn't have any of the walleye or any of the big turtles or anything like that, handy where I live, I'm not exactly on the river anymore. And the Army Corps of Engineers has provided a border that nobody can plant or live on in those areas. It's part of the agreement that was made with when Kennedy came out and established how these rivers were going to capture energy. So having that salmon, I couldn't help but think about all the stories I had heard from some of my family members who married other tribal members who were familiar with fish of different places. And the salmon was something that was introduced to the river, to the Oahe. And, well, let's just put it this way. Everyone's now looking for salmon. They want salmon because of health reasons. We need the fat in order for our joints to be lubricated. We need the fat for all the different kinds of small cells, like our eyes and all these sort of things. And it's fish like salmon, mackerel, and those heavy fat fish. And those heavy fat fish we knew as sturgeon. We ate the eggs, and we had, we made toys out of parts of it. We skinned it and used the skin for bags, and some of the family members beaded them and all. But we never had enough time to talk about some of the things that were floating in my mind when we gathered to respond to Lewis and Clark. So in essence, what it boils down to is that a great theft happened, but it didn't happen just to my tribes, the tribal members that, I'm a multi-tribal person. And many of my family members are married into other tribes, tribal members as well. But what was taken away from us who knew the river intimately was also taken away from all of you, you know, and the river has changed in such a way that it doesn't have, well, let's just put it this way, it needs us to do what we can to bring it back. And that I would like to say, as now I have an audience, I think the best thing that could ever happen to all of us is if that river was decommissioned, the dam was decommissioned, the earth opened in such a manner at the bottom to let the water flow again. When we have these joint problems like I'm having as well, it's because we don't flow, we're not flowing. We're all water, so that makes us, in so many ways, river people, simply because we're alive. When we have things flowing properly, we are even more alive, because then we can touch the spiritual entity of what we're all about. That's the part that's missing in our Americana now. So, if you have anything to say to anybody who has any power to help bring about change, I recommend that you ask them, that them being our government officials, to reconsider the gradual opening of the river to let it flow again.
In my essay, I tried to reflect or try to show how the Indians felt, the Native Americans felt about the river and about the land. And Lewis and Clark left St. Louis in 1804, but 1803 there was an incredible burst of stars that fell out of the sky, hundreds, maybe thousands, blazed spectacularly bright, leaving behind glowing trails of what looked like fire. And the Native American stargazers considered this to be a sign. Something in the universe warned of great disaster approaching. Something that would begin in the east at the Minichaussee, the Missouri. It would bring sickness, starvation, and death to the Lakota. To the Lakota, the Minichaussee was the grandfather river. I put poems here and there throughout my essay, and I wrote, Minichaussee, nomadic, serene, sometimes violent, has seen stars fall out of the sky, leaving black holes in the sky. It has heard the prairie wolves now extinct. It has seen the smoke rise and stretch along the earth's rim, trapping the Sichangu in the low hills. It has seen agony and mindless violence rise and fall against the people. Then I wanted to show, too, what other authors, like Standing Bear, said about the land. He said, the soil you see is not ordinary soil. It is the dust of the blood, the flesh and bones of my ancestors. The land as it is my blood and my death. It is consecrated. And then I wanted to talk about the land along the Missouri and what the land means to us. If this land has a soul, it is in the river. Its deep, rushing waters danced across the breadth of the land. It has woven magical stories, Shifting patterns caressed the weathered pines and the fragrant cedar, the mountains and the prairies. It carried star reflections and rainbow ceremonies. If this land has a soul, it is in the river. It did not turn against those who came to civilize it. So, thank you.
Thank you. So we have 2 minutes left, and we could keep going. I thought we had a lot more time, but I think this is a really great sort of reflection of the contents of the book, and I wanted to just hand it over to Craig to maybe just give a final elevator speech of 2 minutes about this book and why you should buy it and why you should teach it in your classrooms.
One reason is because we don't get any money out of it. So this is support of Oak Lake Writers Society, and so the reprint, if you have the original, you know, it was a photograph taken by a non-native man. The cover is an original commissioned artwork by a Lakota woman. And we wanted to foreground women. Usually it's the men that are foregrounded all the time. And on the cover and through the book, we try hard to this idea of foregrounding women. It reflects, I think, the efforts of our organization, and I think other organizations, to how can we embody this idea of a different tradition of publications. Or how do we do a current and contemporary publication that's arguing it's Oceti Shakowin or it's Lakotan? And one way we do that in this book is all the page numbers. Of course, there wasn't a separate numbering system in Lakotan society or Oceti Shakowin society, but there were words. So for each page number in here, it's written out in Lakotan. Since our organization is Lakotan, we wrote them in Lakotan. The Dakotan and Nakotan's just out of luck, but so you can learn to count from 1 to 134 by getting this book, and I hope in the introduction, I think you've heard a breadth of the works that are in here: poems, prose, critical pieces, historical essays. Kind of spans academia as far as genres. And then I hope that in the introduction we can, Kim and I tried to spell out a little bit about the methodology, and part of that methodology is this communal aspect, and that dialogue that Nick was talking about earlier is there, and also an issue that was, by some of us, was whether or not we can share certain information, just tribal protocols. So those are discussed in the introduction to the book. So yes, I think that's what I can have to say for the book.
So let's give everyone a round of applause. And